The concept of context is central to the understanding of discourse historical approach because it defines many important aspects of this approach. It's a part of, as an important concept, it's a part of many critical discourse studies, including general critical discourse analysis. But in DHA, discourse historical approach, it carries a slightly, we can say, more importance than or as compared to other discourse studies. In DHA, it is also defined as a text in context, because discourse is something which is in context, is a text in context. If there is no particular context known to the people, they won't be able to understand or interpret that discourse according to socio-political perspective. Therefore, that would remain mere collection of words. So when we want to see a discourse from discourse studies perspective or critical or historical perspective, we need to see a text in a context. So context is the key to unlock many important interpretations of a certain collection of words or discourse. Therefore, critical discourse studies pay special attention to various aspects of contextual aspects of a discourse, for example, historical, political, social, cultural, and even cognitive. Context may be broken down into macro, meso, or micro context, which is immediate one. Then we can have a deep context or the broader socio-political context. Generally speaking, a typical discourse historical approach would distinguish between 4 dimensions of a context. In the beginning, we can see there is an immediate linguistic context, which can be called as a co-discourse context or internal discourse context. What has been written, which words have been connected together, which metaphor has been used and which has not been used, what could possibly be said in terms of words and which has not been said, and what has actually been said. The choice of words, they all make this linguistic context. And sometimes, we have already talked about it, this may be very important to interpret a certain discourse. Then intertextual and interdiscursive aspects of our discourse or interrelationships between various discourses and genres in which a certain discourse is produced. So a discourse does not happen in isolation. It is always connected with something which has already been said about that particular topic, and it would be related in future with something which would be said about the same topic. Discourse also falls in a certain category of discourses which is called genres, and therefore it may be interpreted according to the norms, values, composition patterns, designs of that particular genre. If it follows the norms of that genre, that may have one interpretation, and if it escapes or goes away from the norms of that genre, it might have a different interpretation. Then we have certain social factors or institutional frames. We all follow certain patterns of working, interrelationship in our own workplaces, in our own organizations, including domestic institutions, our families, our houses, our streets. We have certain patterns of behaving, certain patterns of working, certain patterns of developing our relationships with others. Therefore, these patterns do define various norms in which we produce our discourses. For example, degree of formality, according to place, time, occasion, addresses, interactive and political roles, and then political and ideological orientations. Obviously, we're talking about a political topic would demand a different kind of a discourse, and about a religious topic would demand a different nature of discourse, as well as the norms of uttering that discourse. The degree of formality might vary according to situations, and a friendly talk would have an altogether different degree of formality. There would be other patterns about gender, age, profession, level of education, ethnic, regional, national, religious identities. They all make up our ways of saying a certain thing. So these social factors, immediate social factors, or immediate social context, or institutional frames do have a bearing on the working, making, and reproduction of our discourses. Finally, on a meso and macro level, we have the socio-political and historical context, which is always integrated in discourse historical approach, and many of us would understand that this probably would be the prime focus of discourse historical approach. At this point, fields of action and the history of the discursive event, as well as the discourse topics, are looked into. People like to trace back the history of a certain discourse or discourse practice. As I said, a discourse historical approach, though is concerned with all kinds of context, is more interested in the broader socio-cultural and historical context. And in this way, we can distinguish between various aspects of context within this discourse historical sense. A discourse fragment of utterance is taken as a starting point, and then in a typical discourse historical analysis, a researcher takes a segment of discourse, then tries to trace back its history. He or she looks into the present and see how it is connected with the web of events which happened in the past, or the discourses produced in the past. So we all see this happens in the discourses of our political leaders, in the discourses of our national and local values-oriented speeches by various religious, social, and political leaders. And a certain event, a certain discourse segment may be acceptable in a certain situation, and it looks an ordinary thing, but when we trace its history, this may be loaded with certain significance of socio-political nature. And sometimes the seemingly innocent utterances may have very harmful meanings when we go deep into their history. Similarly, our discourse historical researchers looks into the diachronic series of or sequence of thematically and functionally connected discourse fragments or utterances in the past. When analyzing present, the researcher in DHA goes back to the history, and then what he sees is historical interrelationship construction in a specific period and in the previous periods, and then he starts his research by looking deep into those relationships. And sometimes the answers of the present questions or questions posed in present times may be found in some events or discourses in the past. This is how a discourse historical approach works. Finally, the third way of looking into the past is the critical analysis of how different social actors, for example politicians, in contrast to historians, talk, write, discuss about the past, or relate their present events to the past. We have seen many of our political leaders relate their present practices to what happened in the past or what they did in the past. For example, in a Pakistani context, a political leader who is governing the country at the moment, in last few decades we have seen they have been blaming the previous governments for all the malpractices which have been happening at present. So what do is they usually relate their present deeds to the deeds of the past, because they think whatever bad is happening is actually related to what was done by the previous leaders or rulers. So a connection is built between the present events and the past, and a DHA analyst would look into that how secure, truthful that connection is. If that connection is based on some kind of vision, he would bring it forward and let the reader know, allow the reader to know that they should be aware of such discourses and should know the reality behind that discourses. And in some of the cases, or in most of the cases, this may be mere rhetoric or political manipulation, and there may not be any substance behind such claims.